Hello, I'm going to record the last chapter of The Little People. So we're on to chapter 19 now. I asked some questions about the last chapter. And the first question was, who did Mrs. Driver get in to clear out the little people from under the floorboards? And she got the rat catcher in. I forgot his name. Rich Wills, I think. And then the next question was, where's the little boy going? So his bags are all packed and he's going somewhere. Going off in a cab that day. So he's going to join his parents who live in India. And then the last question was, what's the last thing the boy does before he leaves? He wants to rescue the little people, remember? And he grabs the pickaxe and he runs round and bashes the ventilation brick aside so that the little people can escape. Okay, so up till now the story has been told all about the borrowers, and now we're going to hear the story from the last chapter is told from the point of view of an old lady called Mrs. May, who's telling the story to a little girl called Kate. And so Mrs. May is going to tell Kate what happened after the boy had left. Turns out the boy was her brother. Okay. So, last chapter. But, exclaimed Kate, didn't he see them coming out? No. Mrs. Driver came along then in a flurry of annoyance because they were late for the train. She bustled him into the cab because she wanted to get back again, she said, as fast as she could to be in at the death. Mrs. Driver was like that. Kate was silent a moment, looking down. So that is the end, she said at last. Yes, said May, in a way, or the beginning. But, Kate raised a worried face, perhaps they didn't escape through the grating. Perhaps they were caught after all. Oh, they escaped all right, said Mrs. May lightly. But how do you know? I just know, said Mrs. May. But how did they get across those fields with the cows and things and the crows? Well, they walked. The Hendreries did it. People can do anything when they have a mind to. But poor Homily, she was so upset. Yeah, she was upset, said Mrs. May. But how would they know the way, said Kate. By the gas pipe, said Mrs. May. There's a kind of ridge all along through the spinney and across the fields. You see, when men dig a trench and put a pipe in, all the earth they've dug out doesn't quite fit in when they put it back. The ground looks different. But poor Homily, she didn't have her tea, or her furniture, or her carpets, or anything. Do you suppose they took anything? Oh, people always grab something, said Mrs. May shortly. The oddest thing, sometimes. But, went on Kate in a despairing voice, Homily would hate to arrive there all poor and destitute in front of Loopy. Destitute, said Mrs. May patiently. And Loopy wasn't there, remember. Loopy never came back. And Homily would be in her element. Can't you see her? Oh, these poor silly men, she'd cry, and would tie on her apron at once. Were they all boys? Yes, harpsichords and clocks, and they'd spoil Arrietty dreadfully. What did they eat? Did they eat caterpillars, do you think? Oh, goodness, child, of course they didn't. They would have had a wonderful life. Badger sets are almost like villages, full of passages and chambers and storehouses. They could gather hazelnuts and beechnuts and chestnuts. They could gather corn, which they could store and grind into flour, just as humans do. It was all there for them. They didn't even have to plant it. They had honey. They could make elderflower tea and lime tea, They had hips and haws and blackberries and sloes and wild strawberries. The boys could fish in the stream, and a minnow to them, tiny little minnow, would be as big as a mackerel to you. They had birds' eggs, any amount of them, for custards and cakes and omelettes. You see, they would know where to look for things. And they had greens and salads, of course. Think of a salad made of those tender shoots of young hawthorn, with sorrel and dandelion and a sprinkling of thyme and wild garlic. Homily was a good cook, remember. It wasn't for nothing that the clocks had lived under the kitchen. But the danger, said Kate. The weasels and the crows and the stoats and all those things. Yes, agreed Mrs. May. Of course there was danger. There's danger everywhere, but no more for them than for many of us. At least they didn't have wars. These were boys, remember. They would learn to hunt for the pot and how to protect themselves. I don't suppose it's very likely that Arrietty and Homily would wander far afield. Arrietty would, said Kate. Yes, agreed Mrs. May, laughing. I suppose Arrietty might. So they'd have meat, said Kate. Yes, sometimes. But borrowers are borrowers, not killers. I think, said Mrs. May, that if a stoat, say, killed a partridge, they might borrow a leg. And if a fox caught a rabbit, they'd use the fur. Yes, for rugs and things. Supposing, said Kate excitedly, when they had a little roast, they skinned haws and baked them, would they taste like browned potatoes? Perhaps, said Mrs. May. But they couldn't cook in the badger set, I suppose. They cooked out of doors? How would they keep warm then in the winter? Do you know what I think? Said Mrs. May. She laid down her work and leaned forward a little. I think they didn't live in the badger set at all. I think they used it, with all its passages and storerooms, as a great honeycomb of an entrance hall. None but they would know the secret way through the tunnels which led at last to their home. Borrowers love passages, and they love gates, and they love to live a long way from their own front doors. Well, where would they live then? I was wondering, said Mrs. May, about the gas pipe. Oh, yes, cried Kate, I see what you mean. The soil's all soft and sandy up there. I think they'd go right through the badger set and dig out a circular chamber level with the gas pipe, and off this chamber all around it there'd be little rooms like cabins, and I think, said Mrs. May, that they'd bore 3 little pinholes in the gas pipe. One would be so tiny that you could hardly see it, and that one would be always alight. The other 2 would have stoppers in them, which, when they wanted to light the gas, they would pull out. They would light the bigger ones from the small burner. That's where they'd cook, and that would give them light. But would they be so clever? They are clever, said Mrs. May. Very clever. Much too clever to live near a gas pipe and not use it. They're borrowers, remember. But they'd want a little air hole. Oh, said Mrs. May quickly, they did have one. How do you know? Asked Kate. Because once, when I was up there, I smelled hot pot. Cried Kate excitedly. She twisted round and knelt up on her stool. So you did go there. So that's how you know. You saw them too. No, said Mrs. May, drawing back a little in the chair. I never saw them. Never. But you went up there. You know something. I can see you know. Yes, I went up there. Mrs. May stared back into Kate's eager face. Hesitant, she seemed, almost a little guilty. Well, she conceded at last, I'll tell you. For what it's worth, when I went to stay in that house, it was just before Aunt Sophie went into the nursing home. I knew the place was going to be sold, so Again, Mrs. May hesitated almost shyly. Well, I took all the furniture out of the doll's house and put it in a pillow-case and took it up there. I bought things too, out of my own pocket money, tea and coffee beans and salt and pepper and cloves and a great packet of lump sugar. and I took a whole lot of little pieces of silk, which were from making a patchwork quilt, and I took them some fish bones for needles. I took the tiny thimble I'd got in a Christmas pudding, and a whole collection of scraps and cracker things I'd had in a chocolate box. But you never saw them? No, I never saw them. I sat for hours against the bank below the hawthorn hedge. It was a lovely bank, twined with twisted hawthorn roots and riddled with sandy holes, and there were wood violets and primroses and early campion. From the top of the bank you could see for miles across the fields. You could see the woods and the valleys and the twisting lanes. You could see the chimneys of the house. Perhaps it was the wrong place. I don't think so. Sitting there in the grass, half dreaming and watching beetles and ants, I found an oak apple. It was smooth and polished and dry, and there was a hole bored in one side of it, and a slice off the top. "The teapot!" exclaimed Kate. I think so. I looked everywhere, but I couldn't find the quill spout. I called then, down all the holes, as my brother had done, but no one answered. Next day when I went up there, the pillow-case had gone. And everything in it? Yes, everything. I searched the ground for yards around in case there might be a scrap of silk or a coffee bean, but there was nothing. Of course, somebody passing might have just picked it up and carried it away. That was the day, said Mrs. May, smiling, that I smelled hot pot. And which was the day, asked Kate, that you found Arrietty's diary? Mrs. May laid down her work. Kate, she began, in a startled voice, and then uncertainly she smiled. What makes you say that? Her cheeks had become quite pink. I guessed, said Kate. I knew there was something you wouldn't tell me, like reading somebody else's diary. But it wasn't a diary, said Mrs. May hastily, but her cheeks had become even pinker. It was the book called Memoranda, the book with blank pages. That's where she'd written it. And it wasn't on that day I found it, but 3 weeks later, the day before I left. Kate sat silent, staring at Mrs. May. After a while she drew a long breath. Then that proves it, she said finally. Underground chamber and all. Well, not quite, said Mrs. May. Why not? Asked Kate. Arrietty used to make her eaves like little half-moons, with a stroke in the middle. Well, said Kate. Mrs. May laughed and took up her work again. My brother did too, she said. And that's the end. So we're all finished. Last chapter. So what do you think? Do you think they're real, or do you think Mrs. May's brother? Do you think the boy made it all up and told her a story? I think they're definitely real. I like to think so anyway. So I really hope you've enjoyed listening and enjoyed the adventures of the little people. Hopefully I'll be able to start the next book. So if you want to, you could join me for the next time and we'll find out the adventures of the little people, what happened to them next. Okay, bye bye for now.